Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today, we're exploring an analogy that the Supreme Lord Himself gives in the Bhagavad-gītā, one that deals with controlling our senses. So let's dive right in and take a look at the Gita reference first. In the Bhagavad-gītā, chapter 2, verse 58, Krishna, the Supreme, says, "One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness." Imagine a tortoise crawling along when suddenly it senses danger. Immediately, without delay, it pulls all of its limbs into the safety of its shell, including its head. This is a materially safer option for the tortoise when faced with danger. In the same way, on the spiritual path of Bhakti Yoga, we learn to pull back our senses and rein in our mind when faced with material distractions, things that are unhelpful for our cultivation of spiritual life. This may include bad association, people who negatively influence our spiritual life, or degrading music, or obscene television and media, etc. In Bhakti, we learn to reflect on and recognize what hampers our spiritual life. Then we withdraw our attention from any degrading influences, just as the tortoise withdraws its limbs when it senses danger. And we redirect our focus to spiritual engagements. This practice of withdrawing the senses is known as pratyahara in Sanskrit and in the Ashtanga Yoga paradigm. We don't wait for our senses and our mind, which responds to sensory input, to become overwhelmed. We don't flirt with danger. The cost of carelessness in spiritual life is serious. It can mean another material lifetime, another material body, another turn in the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth and death in this temporary world. And who really wants to go through the four miseries of material life, birth, old age, disease, and death, again and again and again? I know I don't. So instead, when we encounter things or people that might pull us off the path of Bhakti Yoga, we learn to withdraw our mind and senses from whatever is externally distracting them, just like a tortoise in danger. And we redirect our mind and senses spiritually. First, we remember who we truly are, the eternal spirit soul, or Atma in Sanskrit. And then we remember our ultimate goal in life, to reconnect with Krishna, the Supreme, and the source of you, me, and everything in existence. We also take shelter of our spiritual practices, which we will discuss at the end of this session. Now, importantly, this doesn't mean that we reject the world entirely and retreat to a cave in the Himalayas. Rather, Bhakti Yoga teaches us to see the world through a spiritual lens, to engage everything in our lives in the service of the Supreme Lord. And if something cannot be used in Krishna's service, intoxicants, meat eating, etc., then we let those things go, not by force most of the time, but naturally, as we begin to develop a higher spiritual taste and come to realize what is in our spiritual best interest. Just like a young girl naturally gives up playing with dolls one day, the things in our lives that no longer serve our spiritual progress begin to fall away, not by force or artificially, but naturally, because our attention has shifted to something deeper and more fulfilling. Even though this process happens naturally, still we are urged to reflect on our current habits. This requires spiritual intelligence, the ability to discriminate. We are urged in spiritual life to reflect. What brings me closer to Krishna? And what draws me further away? And then we begin to add more of what brings us closer to Krishna. And naturally, there will then be less time for the things that take us further from him. And we will eventually have less taste or attraction for the activities that draw us away from Krishna. We'll talk about this in a moment. But first, it's important to remember that if we try to repress our senses artificially, it won't work for long. Eventually, without anything else to do, our senses rebel, and we fall back into old material habits. That's why in genuine spiritual life, we don't repress our senses, we redirect them. This means learning to purify our senses by engaging them in Krishna's service. But how do we do that? As we hinted at a moment ago, we begin by filling our lives with spiritual sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. Just as a child reaching for a dangerous object like a knife on a kitchen counter can be safely distracted with a toy, our senses can be gently redirected toward Krishna. In this way, our senses are not denied but uplifted. For example, we can spiritualize our home by chanting the Maha Mantra every day, creating a simple home altar for Krishna, and keeping sacred texts like the Bhagavad-gītā on our bookshelf. We can then gaze upon the beautiful form of the deity, hear the sound of Krishna's holy names during our daily chanting, smell the fragrance of incense that we offer to Krishna, feel our chanting beads or spiritual texts in our hands, and taste prasadam, vegetarian food lovingly prepared and offered to the Lord prior to our consuming it or honoring it, as we say in Bhakti. Chanting the Maha Mantra shown on screen is a powerful way to engage our senses in a higher spiritual activity. The Maha Mantra itself is comprised of the purifying holy names of the Supreme, and simply by chanting it, our senses, mind, and consciousness become purified and elevated from the material level to the spiritual level. When we chant, we engage multiple senses at once: the tongue in speaking the Maha Mantra, the ears in hearing the sound of the holy names of the Supreme, and our sense of touch in feeling our chanting beads. With 3 of our senses engaged, our mind is also more likely to stay engaged in the spiritual activity of chanting. Like this, when our senses and mind are engaged in an elevated spiritual way, then our whole spiritual life becomes joyful, not forced. And as we grow more attracted to such higher spiritual experiences, our taste for lower material distractions and activities fades on its own, replaced by a deeper spiritual satisfaction in Krishna consciousness. We can think of the senses like wild horses pulling a chariot. If our senses, the horses, are not trained or directed or reined in, then they will run in all directions, dragging our body and mind into all sorts of material activities. But if we train our senses through spiritual practices, especially by chanting the Maha Mantra, we, the soul or jiva in Sanskrit, begin to regain control of our whole life. Our mind then yields to our higher spiritual intelligence. Our senses follow suit, and the chariot of our life moves steadily towards its true destination, Krishna. Bhakti Yoga, at its heart, is the art of remaining conscious of Krishna at all times. It's not about rejecting the material world, but about reshaping our relationship with everything in it. We learn to see everything in our life in connection with Krishna, And those things that truly cannot be used in his service, like intoxicants or violent habits, we gradually give up as the higher taste of spiritual life replaces our lower propensities. When engaged in Krishna's service, and when attracted to spiritual sights, sounds, and experiences, our senses become purified, which means that they stop attracting us, the soul, to matter. They become like a serpent whose fangs have been removed. Just as a fangless snake can no longer harm us, our purified senses, though still active, no longer drag us into material life. So next time you feel pulled outward by spiritually unhelpful material distractions, remember the tortoise and don't be discouraged. Just gently withdraw your senses inward. Remember that this doesn't mean artificially repressing your senses. It means offering them a higher spiritual engagement. Redirect your attention. Do something spiritual in that very moment, even something small. If you are out and about, this can be as simple as remembering that Krishna resides in your heart as Paramatma, the super soul within. You can feel his presence there and chant the Maha Mantra within your mind. If you are in the car, you can turn on a kirtan you like or a class on the Gita. If you are at home, you can take shelter in your chanting practice, or you can open your copy of the Gita and read a verse along with its purport. Or you can reach out to a friend on the path of Bhakti Yoga. There are so many spiritual options available to us. We can also remember Srila Prabhupada's powerful words from the purport to today's verse. Srila Prabhupada writes, "The tortoise can at any moment wind up its senses and exhibit them again at any time for particular purposes. Similarly, the senses of the Krishna conscious persons are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead of for his own satisfaction. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keeps the senses within." Even one small turn toward Krishna can redirect the course of our day and our consciousness. Krishna sees every effort we make, however small, and he lovingly reciprocates. We're never alone in spiritual life. If we take even one sincere step toward Krishna, he takes 10 steps toward us. And with Krishna on our side, we cannot lose. Just as Arjuna was ultimately victorious, not by his own strength, but because he took shelter of Krishna, so too can we find success on the path of bhakti by turning to Krishna when the material going gets rough. Victory or success in Bhakti Yoga doesn't depend on perfection. It depends on connection to Krishna, how strongly we are connecting to Krishna every day. It is connection or direction over perfection in spiritual life. When we choose to take shelter of Krishna again and again every day, we are aligning ourselves with the supreme absolute truth, who is capable of anything and everything. What can't he accomplish? And thus, Krishna himself will ensure our ultimate spiritual victory over matter. So that's all we have for today on the analogy of the tortoise withdrawing its limbs, just as the bhakti yogi withdraws their senses from matter and engages them in the service of Krishna. Please let us know your thoughts on today's session and if you have any follow-up questions that we might answer in a follow-up session. In the meantime, thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.